Hey y'all, it's Robert, and in today's video, we're making a cake inspired by the live action movie, The Little Mermaid. So leading up to the movie premiere, there was a doll that was released, and I pre-ordered that doll because I knew I wanted to use it in the cake design. So to start this cake, we're going to level all the cakes, and these are vanilla cakes, and I colored some blue and some of them lavender because I wanted the inside of the cake to match the theme of the outside. So this cake will be a 3-tier cake, so I have 10, 8, and 6-inch cakes. So each of these will be leveled in toward it, that way I'll have multiple layers to work with. And the last step to prep all these cake layers is to add a little simple syrup to make sure that they stay moist and don't dry out. Now I can stack each tier, and I'm adding vanilla buttercream in between each of the cake layers, and I'm adding this using an ice cream scoop. This way I can make sure that I have the same amount in between each layer. For the 8-inch and the 6-inch cake layers, I'm carving down the sides of them just a little to make sure that I have enough room in between the cake board and the cake layers themselves. That way I can add the chocolate ganache and have an even coat. And to make the chocolate ganache, I'm taking this hot heavy whipping cream and then adding this to a bowl of semi-sweet chocolate chips. And after it sits for a while, I'm taking a whisk to mix this all together to make sure that it's combined. While I'm waiting for the ganache to cool, I'm taking a 6-inch and an 8-inch cake board and then covering those with cling wrap. And this is going to allow the boards to be removed without sticking to the ganache. Now I can add ganache to the top of the cake and then smooth it out with an offset spatula. Then I can add the cake board on top. Once the top cake board is in place, I'm then adding ganache to the sides of the cake and then smoothing it out with a scraper. And if there are any air bubbles or any unevenness, I'm just going to add more ganache and keep smoothing it out until I can get it as smooth as I can. After the ganache has set, I'm then going to remove the top cake board by slowly peeling up on the sides of the board until it comes off. Now for the bottom tier, I want this to have a particular shape because this is going to be based off of Ursula. So I'm taking a serrated knife and then just cutting along the sides of it to make sure that I get that curved edge. And then I'm also going to do that to the bottom of it as well to help curve it out. After I carve the cake, I'm then adding a thin crumb coat before I add the ganache. And because of the way this cake is shaped, I'm using an acetate sheet to smooth this out. Now I can start designing this cake. So I'm using modeling chocolate to design Ursula. So I'm going to knead this, and I'm also going to microwave it just a little bit because modeling chocolate can be a little tough to work with in the very beginning. Because of the shape of this cake, it's a little hard to smooth this out, but because I'm using modeling chocolate, I'm able to easily add more that I need to. This way I can get a really smooth and even base. Now I'm going to add the legs to the cake, and I know in the cartoon Ursula only had 6 legs, but in the live action she has 8. So I'm going to add these onto the sides of the cake, and these will be more so as placeholders because I'm going to shape them as I keep going. And this is one of those things where you have to trust the process because you can always add to or take off with modeling chocolate to shape it just how you need to. Okay, so this is the part where I made a big mistake. So I added the suckers onto the tentacles at this point, which was not very wise because it took a really long time to place all of these. And then once I painted them with the lavender color, I realized that it's going to be way too hard to paint around them with the darker purple. So I had to scrape them all off, and that was such a waste of time. So, you know, you make mistakes and you learn from them. So after I scraped them all off, I then decided to paint them with the darker purple first. After all the tentacles are painted purple, I'm now going to paint the top of the cake with black. And then I'm also going to make sure that I'm really careful around the tentacles because I want to make sure that there's a clean separation between the purple and the black. Now to finish the tentacles, I'm going to color some modeling chocolate a lavender color, and then I'm going to roll those into tiny balls and then place those onto each tentacle. Then I'm going to use a ball modeling tool to press down into the center of each ball to create the indentation for the suckers. I'm now done with the bottom tier and can move on to the second tier, and this tier will be designed to look like mermaid scales. So I'm going to roll out white fondant to 1/8 of an inch, and then I have a scale cutter and I'm going to press down into the fondant, but I'm not going to press down completely because I want to keep the scales attached to themselves. That way it's easier to apply it to the cake. To prepare the cake, I'm using a steamer, and this will allow the fondant pieces to stick to the ganache. Then I can place all the fondant scales onto the sides of the cake, and I'm fitting these together like a puzzle, and these all fit together perfectly on the 8-inch cake. I just have to make sure that I don't have any gaps. Now it's time to add color to this cake, so I'm going to use an airbrush to do this, but I don't have the right colors that I need. So to get lavender, I'm mixing together blue, pink, and white. And to get teal, I'm mixing blue, green, and white. Starting with lavender, I'm only going to spray the top portion of the cake, and I'm spinning as I spray to make sure that I have even coverage. And it looks a little light right now, but as it continues to dry, the color will darken. So I'm switching colors and then spraying just the bottom portion of this cake, and then once I get to the middle, I'm spraying very lightly so that there's a really nice ombre. So the middle tier is now done, and this is one of those tiers where it looks pretty simple, but it took a lot of work to get to that final result. So now I can move on to the top tier. So I'm going to cover this cake with white fondant using the paneling method, adding a piece onto the top, and then also wrapping it with white fondant. While the fondant's still soft, I'm using these cursive letter stamps to press Ariel's name into the cake. And I didn't really place these the best, but I'm also not the best at writing in cursive, so we work with what we got. So the base of all the cakes are now done, so now it's time to stack them, but before we stack them, we have to add support. This way the cake doesn't collapse on itself. Starting with the bottom tier, I'm pressing one dowel into the cake and then using a knife to score it. Then I'm removing that dowel and then cutting it where I marked it, and also cutting 4 more, making sure that they're all the same length. Because this is a 10-inch cake, I'm using 5 dowels because I always use half the amount when it comes to the size of the cake. So a 10-inch gets 5 dowels, an 8-inch gets 4 dowels, and if it was needed, the 6-inch would get 3. Now that the support is added, I can now carefully stack all these cakes. This part is always a little nerve-wracking, but you want to make sure that you do it carefully and also try to center it as much as possible because you don't want to move it too much after you place it. So we're almost done with this cake now, and I'm just working on all the final details. So I'm using white fondant and rolling up little balls and then placing these around the cake, and these can be bubbles or pearls. So I wanted to add waves to the top tier, so I'm rolling out 2 different shades of blue and then wrapping those around the cake, and this will imitate the waves. This part was really difficult, but I had to paint an Ariel's name, and I'm using edible paint again, and I'm using pink, but I had to make sure that I stayed into the parts that were embossed, and I didn't really want to get it outside of that area because I wanted this to look as clean as possible. To add more color to this cake, I'm using fondant molds that have sea-themed shapes like starfish and shells, and then placing those around the cake. Now it's time to add the Ariel doll to the top of the cake, and I'm placing her right beside her name. And for the final details, I'm adding more fondant molds onto the top of the cake, and then along the sides of the cake, I'm placing these white pearls to fill in some of the empty spaces. And there we have it, our Little Mermaid cake is now complete, and I had so much fun making this, especially Ursula's tentacles. I thought they came out amazing. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be sure to link all the supplies I use in the description below, just in case you want to check them out. And comment what cake ideas you want me to make next. And click the notification bell just to be sure that you get notified when I post another long form video. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. I've got gadgets and gizmos of plenty. I've got who's it's and what's it's galore. Wait. After I'm done carving the cake, I'm now going to add I'll just bit my lip. Out of the sea. Wait. Can't even finish.